It was late, well past midnight, when Olivia finally left the narrow, winding road and stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the ruin. She wasn't a believer in the old stories. To her, the tales of creatures haunting the Borderlands were just that, stories. But the locals had insisted she stayed away from the old stone tower, said that it was still there. She scoffed at their warnings, eager to prove them wrong. The air felt thicker as she approached the ruin, each step heavy with a sense of foreboding she couldn't quite explain. Olivia shivered, not from the cold, but from the creeping unease crawling up her spine. The night was unusually quiet. No wind rustled the leaves, no owls hooted. Not even the distant hum of crickets could be heard. It was a silence that pressed in from all sides, unnaturally dense. As she reached the broken archway of the tower, she saw it. A small figure, hunched over by the stones. It was barely 3 feet tall. Its skin was pale and taut, kind of like an old parchment. Olivia squinted, trying to make out what it was doing when it slowly turned towards her. The creature's face was hideous, twisted with malice, and its eyes gleamed in the darkness, 2 pinpricks of red in the night. In one gnarled hand, it clutched a sickle, the blade smeared with something dark. But it was the cap, the dripping, crimson cap that froze Olivia in her place. The thing grinned, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. Its iron boots clinked softly as it stood up, taking a deliberate step towards her. Olivia stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. Her rational mind screamed, "Run!" But her feet were glued to the earth as the figure moved closer, each step leaving a bloody smear where it walked. Her breath hissed as it raised its sickle high, and she bolted, tearing through the brambles and barely making it back to her car, her heart still hammering in her chest. But not everyone is that lucky. The topic of tonight's episode is the Red Caps. The Red Cap is a creature of nightmares and an unsettling figure from Scottish and English folklore that has haunted the ruins of the Borderlands for centuries. Standing at a mere 3 feet tall, this grotesque being is far more terrifying than its size suggests. Its skin is a sickly gray, stretched tightly over a bony frame, and its eyes gleam with a cold, malevolent intelligence. The most striking feature, of course, is the blood-soaked cap perched atop its head, a grim token it must keep freshly soaked in human blood, lest it perish. Its teeth are jagged, yellowed, and far too numerous for its small mouth. Beneath its wiry limbs, the red cap wears iron boots, an odd contrast to its otherwise nimble and swift nature. The boots give it a heavy clink with each step. Though this sound serves as little warning, its speed is shockingly fast for something so small and cumbersome. In its hand it clutches a weapon, typically a sickle or a pike, which it uses to slay those unfortunate enough to cross its path. Though small, the red cap is extremely strong. It can drag a full-grown man to his doom with ease, and once its cap is dry, it will stop at nothing to soak it again, using its victim's blood. It's said that the red cap's cap must always be wet, or it will shrivel and die, an eternal thirst that drives its murderous rampages. The legend of the red cap is as old as the blood-soaked soil it stalks. Most people believe the red cap originates from the countless violent battles that once ravaged the borderlands between Scotland and England. The ruins the creature calls home were often ancient fortresses or castles, places that saw more than their fair share of death and misery. The red cap is said to be a manifestation of blood spilled in these places, an embodiment of the violent history that lingers in the stones. There are darker whispers, however, stories that suggest the red cap might have once been human, cursed to live out its existence as a bloodthirsty goblin after committing some heinous act. Others say it is a spirit of a malevolent sorcerer who enchanted himself into this form to cheat death, forever bound to the land where he spilled innocent blood. No matter the tale, all versions agree on one thing: the red cap is driven by an insatiable hunger for violence. The ruins and abandoned castles the red cap haunt are always places of death where battles were fought or murders were committed. They hide in shadows, emerging only when a victim unwittingly enters their domain. Some say the iron doorways of these ruins were not made for defense, but as a way to keep the red caps in. Yet, no lock can hold them forever, and the red cap's thirst must eventually be quenched. One of the most terrifying encounters comes from Henry, a night watchman hired to guard the grounds of an ancient Scottish castle. The castle, a crumbling fortress perched on the edge of a steep cliff, had been abandoned for decades, but local legends claim something still roamed its halls. Henry, a practical man, scoffed at the stories but was grateful for the work. It was an easy enough job, or so he thought. One foggy night, as he made his rounds through the overgrown courtyard, He heard a sound behind him, a faint, metallic clink. Henry froze, his flashlight cutting through the mist, but there was nothing there. He turned back to continue his patrol, but the sound followed, this time faster and closer. Clink, clink, clink. His pulse quickened as the noise grew louder, like iron boots striking the cobblestone path chasing him. Henry turned sharply, swinging his light back and forth. The fog swirled but revealed nothing. Then, just as the noise stopped, he felt it, a cold, clawed hand wrapping around his ankle from behind. He screamed, kicked wildly, but it was as if he had kicked stone. The creature, small, hideous, and grinning, crawled out from the mist, its sickle gleaming in the dim light. It pulled at him, its cap dripping thick, dark fluid. With a desperate lunge, Henry broke free and ran toward the gate. As he glanced back, his breath caught in his throat. The red cap stood still, watching him with those glowing, hateful eyes. When Henry reached the safety of his car, he realized something he left behind. A small, sodden cap lay where the creature had grabbed him, its crimson color unmistakable. Henry quit his job that night, vowing never to return to that cursed place. Another chilling story comes from Abigail, a historian researching ruins in the Scottish Borderlands. She'd spent the day photographing the old watchtower, known for its dark history of betrayal and bloodshed. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the land, Abigail decided to take one last walk around the ruin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. As she approached the base of the tower, Abigail noticed something strange. A figure, small and hunched, stood among the crumbling stones, motionless. At first, she thought it might be a child, perhaps lost or playing among the ruins. But as she drew closer, the figure moved, quickly and unnaturally. It darted between the stones, only to reappear a moment later, closer this time. Its eyes caught the last light of the setting sun, gleaming red in the dimness. Abigail's heart raced as she realized it wasn't a child. It was much, much worse. The creature emerged fully from behind the stones, revealing its grotesque form. Its face was twisted into a sneer, its skin pale and stretched tight over bony limbs. In one hand it clutched a rusty sickle, and on its head a dripping red cap glistened in the fading light. Abigail was rooted to the spot as it began to move toward her, slowly at first, but then with terrifying speed. The iron boots clinked on the stone, each step faster than the last. She barely had time to react, her legs finally obeying her panic-stricken mind as she turned and ran. The creature's laughter, a low, guttural sound, echoing behind her. Even now she swears she can hear that same laughter, only in her nightmares. Then there's the story of Duncan, a farmer from Northumberland who encountered the red cap on a cold, moonless night while searching for the lost sheep. The land around Duncan's farm was dotted with old ruins, remnants of a time when the region was plagued by violence and war. He never paid much mind to the ruins, seeing them as nothing more than a backdrop to his daily life. But that night, as he ventured closer to the derelict tower, he heard something that made his blood run cold. At first, it was a faint, an eerie, rhythmic sound like a chant carried on the wind. But as Duncan drew near to the tower, the chant grew louder, more menacing, a low, rasping voice singing in a language he didn't understand. He stopped in his tracks, squinting into the darkness, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Then the singing stopped. Suddenly there was a loud clink, like metal striking stone, followed by an unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and drawing closer with every second. Duncan's heart raced as he scanned the area, but all he could see were shadows. His mind screamed for him to run, but before he could move, something darted out from the blackness. It was small, no taller than his knee, but its speed and malevolence were unmistakable. The creature's eyes glowed like embers, and in its hand was a jagged pike, sharp and stained. On its head, a blood-soaked cap dripped on the ground with each step it took. Duncan didn't wait to see more. He bolted, sprinting back toward his farm as fast as his legs would carry him. The sound of iron boots striking the rock ground followed him, growing louder and louder. When he finally reached his home, he slammed the door shut and locked it tight. But the creature's face, its sneering grin and cold, red eyes, haunted him for weeks. He never returned to the tower, and he never found his sheep. One more terrifying tale comes from Elias, a hiker who ventured into the Borderlands for a weekend of camping. Elias had always been drawn to places with history, especially those with a darker past, and the abandoned castle on the edge of the moors had seemed like the perfect destination. He set up camp near the ruins, excited for a quiet night under the stars. But as night fell, The atmosphere shifted. The wind picked up, howling through the trees with an unnatural chill, and the ruins seemed to loom larger in the dark. Elias lay in his tent, listening to the wind, when he heard a different sound. Soft at first, but growing clearer. It was the sound of boots. Heavy, iron boots. Walking just outside his tent. He sat up, his heart pounding. He held his breath as the footsteps circled his campsite, slow and deliberate. And then, silence. Summoning all of his courage, Elias unzipped his tent and peered out. The campfire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the ruins. And standing there, just beyond the dying embers, was a figure. It was no taller than a child, but far more sinister in appearance. Its eyes glowed a dull red, and in its hand it held a blood-stained pike. Its cap, wet and dark, dripped onto the stones below. Before Elias could react, the creature stepped forward, its iron boots clinking against the rocks. He scrambled backward, falling into his tent, kicking it over in his panic. By the time he untangled himself and looked up again, the red cap was gone, but the echo of its boots haunted him longer than the night had passed. He packed up and left at first light, swearing never to return to those cursed lands. These stories, though chilling, serve as a reminder of the dark creatures lurking in the forgotten corners of our world. Whether it's Henry's terrifying flight from the old castle, Abigail's narrow escape from the tower, Duncan's haunting encounter, or Elias's night of horror, each encounter with the red cap leaves an indelible mark on those who survive. The red cap, with its blood-stained cap and iron boots, is a creature of dark, violent history. It lurks in the shadows of ancient ruins, waiting for an unwary traveler to stumble into its lair. Quick, cunning, and ruthless, it is a predator driven by insatiable thirst for blood. While these creatures may be confined to the myths and legends of the Scottish and English borderlands, their stories persist, reminding us that not all horrors of the world are forgotten. If you've enjoyed tonight's episode of Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a review wherever you're listening. If you've had an encounter of your own with strange creatures, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear your story. And if you're watching this on YouTube, drop a comment down below. I always love to hear from the listeners. Until next time, keep your wits about you, especially near those old ruins. You never know what might be lurking in the dark.